My pregnant ex-wife and her husband made our daughter do all the chores and wouldn't stop. I told her she wasn't fit to be a mother and decided to ask for full custody. I'm a 40-year-old man, and I have a 16-year-old daughter named Jade with my ex-wife, Margo, who is 38. Margo and I met at a friend's party when I was 21 and she was 19. We hit it off immediately, and I asked her out on the spot because I found her incredibly smart and beautiful. We quickly became inseparable, and after just a few months of dating, we introduced each other to our families. Nearly a year into our relationship, we decided to move in together. Margo was attending college nearby and had been living on campus, but I suggested she move into my apartment, and she agreed without hesitation. This detail would later become a point of contention as she often blamed me for the course her life took, claiming it was my fault she didn't have a career of her own. Despite her later complaints, she was more than willing to move in with me. Our life together seemed perfect at first. Our families approved of our relationship, and we were deeply in love. But shortly after Margo's graduation, she discovered she was pregnant. It's important to note that she was the one who wanted to keep the baby, a point she would later blame me for in the ensuing years. I was supportive of whatever decision Margo made regarding her pregnancy because it was her body, and I thought I wouldn't have any issues with it. When she chose to keep the baby, I was thrilled. At 24, I was working at a marketing and advertising firm with a decent salary, enough to cover household expenses and the costs of raising a child. However, I couldn't afford childcare on my salary alone, and Margo had just graduated with no work experience. I couldn't ask her to find a job while pregnant, so we discussed our options extensively. Ultimately, we agreed that she would stay home to raise our child while I worked. I must have asked her if she was sure about this decision 1,000 times, feeling incredibly guilty. I didn't want her to sacrifice her career for me and our baby, but she assured me she was fine with it and wanted to start a family. Margo was a bright student and could have pursued a successful career if she had looked for a job at that time, but she chose not to. It's crucial to emphasize that I left most of these decisions up to her. I never forced or pressured her into anything because I knew she had the most to lose. When Margo moved in with me, it was because I couldn't move into her college dorm. Similarly, the decision to keep the baby and not terminate the pregnancy was entirely hers, as she was the one who would face the most significant changes. She would be the one carrying the baby and the one who would struggle to find employment after graduation, which was a crucial period. I never tried to persuade her to make any decision that wasn't in her best interest. Even her choice to be a stay-at-home mom was hers alone, and I was merely there to support her. However, as things got tough, she began to blame me for everything. A few months after our daughter was born, Margo started showing signs of postpartum depression. I reached out to her parents, hoping they could convince her to start therapy. I had already tried to discuss it with her, but she dismissed it, insisting it was nothing and becoming irritable whenever I brought it up. Honestly, I was terrified that she might hurt the baby out of anger or frustration, as I had heard such stories before. I was desperate for her to get help, but she refused to acknowledge that she had any problems. I understand that raising a child is an incredibly challenging task, and I will always be grateful to Margo for doing her best at the time. However, I must admit that living with her became increasingly difficult. In the years following Jade's birth, she often seemed angry with me. At first, I could understand the stress and frustration that came with new motherhood, and I hoped it would improve with time. But even after a year or two, her anger towards me didn't subside. We couldn't have a conversation without it turning into a fight, and it often felt like she was looking for an excuse to argue. She would snap at me over the smallest things, and while I tried to overlook it, it became increasingly challenging because I was working hard all day. After a long day at work, the last thing I wanted was to come home to a perpetually annoyed and angry wife. Over time, it became harder for me to let things go or avoid escalating arguments, and the tension between us only grew. Margo consistently blamed me for everything that went wrong in her life, and I could never understand why. As I mentioned before, all the decisions she made were her own, and I never tried to influence them. Yet, whenever we argued, she would bring up how she had sacrificed everything for me, accusing me of being ungrateful. I didn't understand where this idea came from because I was always looking for ways to show my gratitude for everything she had done for me and our family. I would plan dates every weekend and take her out for dinner at least 4 times a month to fancy places because I knew she enjoyed them. I celebrated every milestone with great pomp and extravagance, but nothing seemed to be enough for her. She continued to complain about my lack of gratitude. Even when I took her out, she would always find a reason to fight and never seemed to just enjoy the moment. The constant blame was becoming unbearable, and I found myself regretting ever meeting Margaret or asking her out. Even when I presented valid points during our arguments, she would dismiss them by reminding me of her sacrifice to raise our daughter. I had promised to support her, so I felt compelled to just stay quiet and endure it. However, I didn't see constantly being treated as a doormat as true support. I continued to endure it for the sake of my daughter, Jade, not wanting her to suffer. We remained married for nearly 5 years, and with each passing year, the fights grew worse, making it increasingly difficult to cope with Margaret. A few months after Jade turned 5, I realized I could no longer make the marriage work. After a particularly bitter argument, I knew that Jade deserved a better life, one we couldn't provide if we stayed together. By then, Margaret and I were either always fighting or barely speaking, creating a hostile environment that I didn't want for Jade. I had once hoped we'd eventually find our way back to being a happy couple, but by then, I had lost all hope. The future of our marriage seemed bleak, and I decided that getting a divorce was the best option for our family. One day, I decided to drop Jade off at my parents' house and talk to Margaret at home. I told her that our marriage wasn't working and that our daughter deserved better, so we needed to consider divorce. I had no idea how she would react, but I certainly didn't expect her to confess to cheating on me. She revealed that she had been having an affair for the past year with a coworker of mine who she had met at a work party I had taken her to. Hearing this made things clearer and eased my guilt about leaving her. By then, I had already fallen out of love with her, but the revelation was still a huge shock. The divorce was amicable, and I ended up with almost everything. She didn't contest it because she knew her actions were wrong and couldn't be undone, so she agreed to let me have most of what I wanted, receiving only the bare minimum in the settlement. She didn't even ask for alimony as her affair disqualified her from it. The one thing she fought for was custody of Jade. She fought fiercely for partial custody and worked hard to establish an arrangement that worked for both of us. I had initially wanted Jade to spend 3/4 of the month with me, leaving Margaret with her for 1 week. However, Margaret and her lawyer fought hard to increase her time with Jade to half the month, refusing to settle for anything less. I decided to concede because I didn't want to use Jade as a pawn for revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Margaret. She was Jade's mother, and I didn't want Jade to grow up resenting me. It's ironic that after fighting so hard for custody, Margaret ended up treating Jade poorly. After the divorce was finalized, co-parenting became much easier because we no longer had to deal with each other constantly. My life improved significantly post-divorce. I finally had the freedom to pursue everything I had wanted to do while walking on eggshells around Margaret. It was a huge relief, and I even decided to quit my job to start my own business, something I had been considering for a long time. Moreover, continuing to work at the same company, where the man who had contributed to the breakdown of my marriage sat just a few desks away, was something I couldn't bear. Working there during the divorce was tough enough. I didn't want to stay any longer. I know for a fact that Margaret and her affair partner broke up shortly after she announced our separation online. She even apologized to me again for everything, but by then, her apologies meant nothing to me. I only stayed in contact with her because we needed to co-parent. Without that obligation, I would have had no reason to speak to her again. After the divorce, we kept our interactions to a minimum, and even now, we only communicate when absolutely necessary. It's been over a decade since our divorce, and both of us have moved on completely. She got married a few years ago to a man we'll call Shane, who from what I understand was introduced to her by my ex-mother-in-law. They dated for about 2 years before getting married. I believe Shane is an architect, and I've heard good things about him. Good for her. I've had my share of flings and casual relationships, but nothing too serious. Right now, dating a guy with a teenage daughter isn't exactly appealing to many. A couple of months ago, we were all taken by surprise when Margaret announced that she was pregnant again. Given her age, I thought it was a bit risky, but it's not my place to comment. With advancements in medical technology, many women opt for late pregnancies, so I genuinely wished her the best. The least I could do was congratulate her, which I did, and she thanked me. That was the extent of our interaction when she announced it, about 4 months ago. After that, I noticed that Jade was always reluctant to spend time with Margaret. She seemed unusually tired and unhappy whenever she returned. At first, I didn't think much of Jade's reluctance to stay with Margaret. She told me she was just tired from school, and I believed her. This had been going on for a couple of months since the pregnancy announcement. It wasn't until this month, when Jade came back to live with me, that I noticed she looked even more exhausted than usual, and something felt off. I decided to talk to her and ask what was going on, but she refused to say anything for the first few days. She kept insisting that everything was fine, but I could tell she was hiding something. After much persistence, she finally agreed to tell me what was bothering her, and things have since taken a turn for the worse. Jade revealed that her mother and Shane had started treating her like a free housekeeper, making her do all the chores around the house every day after school. As soon as Jade arrived, she was expected to start cooking, and once that was done, she was made to clean the house from top to bottom. The worst part was that they all lived in squalor. During the part of the month when Jade wasn't with them, they wouldn't clean at all. They would wait for her to come over and then pile all the chores on her. Jade said she couldn't say no because every time she protested, Margaret would use her pregnancy as an excuse. Margaret would complain about how I hadn't been helpful when she was pregnant with Jade, and this time she had expected things to be different, hoping Jade would be more understanding than her husband. Margaret claimed she was always too tired, even though she was only in her second trimester, which had barely started. Shane also said he was always exhausted after work and couldn't help out. Unfortunately, they were relying on Jade to handle all the household chores. Margaret even argued that it wasn't too much to ask of Jade, as it wasn't like she was doing everything for her. Throughout the month, Margaret and Shane managed to do everything for themselves. When Jade was living with me, she wasn't happy about this arrangement, but she felt obligated to help because she didn't want to feel guilty about abandoning her pregnant mother. She kept going along with it without complaining, even though it was a thankless job. She put up with it only because Margaret was pregnant and didn't tell me anything, fearing I'd get angry and cause more drama. She wanted to avoid any conflict, knowing it would only add stress for her mother. However, Jade finally realized she couldn't continue like this after an incident that occurred the day before she returned home. Jade had been trying her best to see Margaret and Shane in a neutral light, but after what Shane said the day before she returned home, she felt she couldn't go back there. It was clear that they had crossed a line. Jade told me that the day before she left, she was packing her things in her room when Shane walked by. Noticing she was packing, he asked her why, and she explained that she was moving back to my place for the next 2 weeks, as per the arrangement. Shane seemed surprised that the time had passed so quickly and commented that he would miss her because the house would be a mess again for the next 2 weeks without her. He mentioned that he had considered hiring a housekeeper just for those 2 weeks and laughed as if it were a joke. When Jade asked him to clarify, he bluntly told her that she was now just a glorified housemaid to him. He claimed it was meant as a compliment because she was really good at it, and he thought she could even make a career out of it, suggesting she'd be more useful that way, unlike her mother. I was honestly stunned when Jade told me what Shane had said. I had only heard good things about him from others, but that comment was the most misogynistic and disgusting thing I had ever heard. It was hard to control my temper, but Jade assured me that she had already made up her mind not to go back, so there was no need for me to confront them. However, I couldn't just let this go, and I knew I had to speak to Margaret about it. I called her after about an hour and relayed everything Jade had told me, including Shane's comment. I demanded an explanation for why she thought any of it was acceptable because I was furious. They had been treating our daughter like a housemaid for weeks, and Margaret had been condemning it. It was simply unacceptable for Jade, a school student, to be working so hard. I could forgive Margaret for not doing housework herself because I understood it might be difficult for her given her pregnancy, but there was no excuse for her husband not to help out. If my 16-year-old daughter could manage household chores and keep up with her schoolwork, I expected a grown man to do the same without making a fuss. Let's not forget that Shane is the adult in this situation, and it's incredibly unfair to make a literal child do so much work without any help. It's almost criminal, and I couldn't let it go. But to my surprise, Margaret just started laughing and brushed it off, saying it was no big deal and that Shane probably meant it as a joke. I couldn't believe what I was hearing and told her that whether it was a joke or not, it was deeply insulting, and Jade and I didn't appreciate it at all. Margaret then accused me of trying to create drama where there wasn't any, making it sound like I was the one overreacting. I couldn't understand what was so funny about any of this. Not only had Shane implied that my daughter was just there to do all the work, but he had also suggested that Margaret herself was pretty useless. If not for Jade's sake, she could at least take some pride and be offended for herself. But Margaret insisted it was all a joke and no big deal. She tried to explain that this was just how they talked to each other, and it was fine because she knew he didn't mean it seriously. She even said that if he did, she didn't mind because it was technically true, given that she was just a stay-at-home wife who didn't do any heavy lifting apart from household chores. I was shocked by how Margaret now viewed herself, especially considering how different things were when we were married. She used to talk about the work she did around the house, and I always respected her for it. But now it seemed like she had lost all respect for herself, and I didn't want Jade to be around her anymore because she seemed to have lost control. In a moment of frustration, I told her I didn't think she was fit to be a mother anymore and hoped her next child would be a son, as she clearly wasn't the right person to handle having a daughter. Then I hung up on her. That statement didn't sit well with anyone. Margaret and her family have been harassing me since then, arguing that what I said was out of line, especially since I said it to a pregnant woman, and I should have been more sensitive. Jade also thinks I should have let it go since she had already decided not to go back, and I didn't need to intervene because they were clearly overwhelmed. So I apologize for telling my pregnant ex-wife that she was unfit to be a mother. Update 1. Hi everyone, it's been 4 days since I posted, and there have been a lot of comments. Most of you agree that I did the right thing, and I'm grateful for the support. However, some of you are skeptical about my role as a husband the first time around. Let me clarify that I know what I was and how supportive I was throughout our marriage. It fell apart because Margaret wasn't willing to give us a chance to work things out. I could have cheated on her many times, justifying it by saying, "Things are getting tough. I need an outlet, so I have to sleep with someone else." But unlike her, I wanted to make our marriage work for Jade's sake. Even when I decided to file for divorce, it was for Jade's well-being. While I fully support the idea that housewives deserve more appreciation, I don't believe Margaret qualifies for that respect because she cheated on me. That being said, I stand by my decision and don't feel I owe her an apology. I also talked to Jade about it, and she expressed that she would prefer not to be around her mother for the time being. She felt that if Margaret thought Shane's comment about her being a glorified housemaid was no big deal, then they clearly had very different ideas about how she should be treated. Jade did not want to return to a place where she wasn't given the bare minimum of love and respect, and I agree with her. Therefore, we have decided to file for full custody. Although she will only be a minor for 2 more years, we want to ensure that during this time, Margaret won't be able to negatively impact our lives further. Update 2. My lawyer and I filed for full custody of Jade a couple of days ago, and yesterday, Margaret was served. Needless to say, she did not take it well and launched a public attack on me online. She posted about how insensitive I was and how she regretted giving up anything for me. She accused me once again of ruining her life by forcing her to abandon her career and blamed me for everything, just as she has often done, but this time I wasn't going to let it slide. I took screenshots of her post and sent them to my lawyer. Then I decided to respond in the comments to reveal the full truth about her actions so everyone could see what a deceitful person she was. Of course, she disabled comments as soon as she realized I was going to speak up, which I expected from her. After that, I blocked her, and I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders now that I no longer have to deal with this drama. Whatever happens next, we'll settle it in court and move forward. Update 3. Hello, just a quick update. It turns out we didn't even need to start the proceedings for renegotiating the custody arrangement because, surprisingly, Margaret has decided to sign away her parental rights over Jade. She informed me of her decision a couple of days ago, and my lawyer quickly drew up the necessary papers. I have to admit, I didn't see this coming because the first time we fought for custody, she was extremely determined and fought tooth and nail for Jade's custody. Not only was she allowing Jade to be treated poorly, but she also chose to give up her custody because she now has a new family and, apparently, her priorities have changed. She put all this in an email, once again blaming me entirely. She claimed that I had turned Jade against her, making her believe that Margaret was a bad person and an unfit mother. She accused me of poisoning Jade's mind against her and hoped I was finally satisfied because I was getting exactly what I had wanted all along. According to her, I had proven to everyone that she was a terrible mother, and Jade had bought into it. I don't even see how this could be my fault because I never told them to treat Jade badly. Jade herself didn't want to live with Margaret or Shane anymore, which is why she expressed a preference for me to have full custody. Terminating Margaret's parental rights seemed extreme, but that was Jade's decision, and I have always respected her choices. I haven't tried to stop her from making any decisions she felt were best for herself, and I don't plan to do so now or in the future. When I informed Jade about Margaret's decision, she seemed a bit upset, but she assured me that this was for the best and that she didn't mind. Nonetheless, I've decided to enroll her in therapy because I believe it could greatly benefit her. She's been through a lot, and the poor kid could really use some peace and relaxation in her life. I wouldn't wish a mother like Margaret on anyone, but thankfully that's no longer her reality. I just hope and pray that I can be a good single father to her. She seems happy to be with me, and I hope it stays that way.